Thank you. You know, this is always so exciting for me to be up here and to bring a message. I always have so much fun, and I love to talk with you guys after service, so let's get right into it. As you can tell, I am not Pastor Cal. He is away on the Suriname trip, and he had asked me to bring the word this morning, and I felt privileged and honored. So I had a question that I thought I wanted to open up this morning with. The question is this. Have you ever found yourself in a situation that you didn't want to be in? Anybody? And looking back, you're kind of like, wait, how did I get myself into that, right? Well, for instance, last week I was on this trip with my dad and an old college friend of mine, and we went to Utah to a national park called Zion National Park. And when we were there, we embarked on this very large hike called Angel's Landing. There's actually a picture of it right here. Angel's Landing, and I've got to be completely honest, you can see the mountain peak right there. When I signed up for this, I didn't really quite know what I was getting myself into. You know what I'm talking about? And this, to me, was going to be a walk in the park, like no sweat, right? And obviously that would not be what it was like. After about an hour and a half of summiting, we rounded what appeared to be the last bend. We had just gone 1,000 feet, and then I'm greeted by this intimidating view right here. Oh boy. We've still got another mountain peak to go. And in fact, the back end of this hike would be far different than the first. There's actually a video here for you all to see. This hike would be far different. Whereas in the past, we had walked along this rock dirt path, then we would actually be walking directly on the face of the mountain with really nothing to support you except for this little black chain. Let me tell you, they didn't tell this brother that was going to happen. And in some parts, they didn't even have this black chain. So at any point, if you make one small misstep or if a rock give way underneath you, you could definitely fall to your impending death. And I've got to tell you, this is not where I wanted to be. When I got out of the van that morning, this is not where I had predicted myself being. Well, thankfully, I made it back in one piece, but I think we've all found ourselves in situations that you just don't want to be in. Take, for example, these people right here. Look at this picture here. If you are afraid of heights, I'm sure you can relate to these guys, right? Being at the top of the roller coaster is probably not where you want to be. But maybe that's not you. Maybe there's some outdoorsy people in the room and you like to camp, you like to hunt. Well, I doubt that you would want to be in this guy's shoes. That's probably not a situation that you want to find yourself, right? Well, it gets even worse. Maybe you've been out with your friends and you've been having a good time and they started to convince you to do something that normally you would not do. And you end up like this guy. And all of a sudden you're upside down wondering, wait a second, how did they get me in this position? This is not where I had anticipated myself. Well, as we are approaching winter, I'm sure there are many of us who are dreaming of the perfect beach vacation, but I doubt that any of us would want to trade spots with this guy. Not where you want to be, right? Or maybe you thought it was a good idea to go on a safari. It was a good idea until you found yourself in this position. I love that face. That really captures everything, right? And maybe like me, you've signed up for something just out of the goodness of your heart, and you just really didn't know what you were quite getting yourself into, and you probably feel like this little guy right here. And I didn't sign up for this, right? And I was just having too much fun with this, guys. I found this picture of a cat. I'm no cat fan, but when I saw this cat picture, woo, it was good. Here it is. There are situations that you don't want to be in. Now, we had a lot of fun with that, and granted, these are some pretty wacky moments that were captured, but I think we've all found ourselves in similar predicaments, and though they might not be as extreme as the ones on the screen, nevertheless, we've all been in a certain spot when we'd rather not. And really, there's really sometimes no other person to blame but yourself. The finger goes right back at you. We perhaps made a bad decision, or maybe you got in over your head, and so we can kind of see the cause and effect. But what do we do when you find yourself in a situation that seems beyond your control? What do you do when it really wasn't all up to you? And that's where it gets brought home. So what do you do when a family member passes away, leaving a void in your life? Or what do we do when your marriage begins to fall apart? What do we do when one of your kids begins to fall away from the Lord? Or when you're stuck in a career that you don't really enjoy. Or when you are following the Lord yet falling prey to anxiety or depression. And that's not where you want to be. And it seems sometimes out of your control. I think the question that usually comes to the surface is why, right? Why is this happening to me? What is the purpose? And so I think that's so important for us to talk about this morning. And as we're getting into the story in the Bible, the topic that we'll be covering is this: finding purpose when I'm not where I want to be. Finding purpose. What is the reason when I find myself in certain situations that I didn't really sign up for? Sometimes I think we take inventory on where we're at in life, and we're not so happy with the progress, right? I mean, maybe you had these ideas or these dreams of what you'd be doing in college or who you'd be like in your 30s, and those dreams seem more like fantasy than reality. I mean, you might have pictured yourself at a different job or working for a different company, but now you're stuck in a career that you don't really enjoy. Or maybe you thought you'd be married by now, but there doesn't seem to be any suitable match in sight. You're not even in a serious relationship. It doesn't seem like it's happening anytime soon. I mean, at this point in your life, you might have envisioned yourself surrounded by family and hanging out with the grandkids during the week, but they're out of the state and they're not around, and so you kind of feel alone. And you thought you'd be happy by now, and that just isn't the case. And so where you're at right now is not where you want to be, and you're left wondering, what is the reason behind all this? Does God even care about my dreams? Why have things not gone according to plan? And so there's a guy in the Bible who actually was asking some pretty similar questions, because he had these dreams, he had these ideas of what he would be doing in the future. He had a picture of what life would look like. And yet for many years when he grew up, those dreams seemed more like a fantasy than reality. But it's so fascinating because in his story, he finds this purpose even where he wasn't where he wanted to be. He finds this arrow kind of pointing him in the right direction. And so I thought for all of us here in the room, no matter where you might find yourself this morning, we've got to dig in and find the purpose when I'm not where I want to be. Amen? Are you guys with me? We need to get into this story. I'm going to walk you through a pretty lengthy story rather quickly, so you got to strap on that seatbelt. Hang on, we're going to get there, okay? So we're going to start with Genesis chapter 37. The story starts with a young man by the name of Joseph. Could you say that for me? Joseph. I'm sure that many of you might be familiar with parts of his story, but this is what happens at the very beginning. Joseph had a what? He had a dream. And when he told it to his bros, they hated him all the more. And he said, hey, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Huh? Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Woo. Well, one night, what just happened here? One night, Joseph has a weird dream. You saw that. It was a little bizarre. And he does something that probably you or I might do. When you have a crazy dream, what do? You got to tell somebody about it. Apparently, last week, I had quite a weird dream. And it was so bizarre that I actually, as I was sleeping, I just said, "Arr!" And Deonza woke up. It was a frightening experience for both of us. And I had to tell her what that dream was all about, because you don't just make that sort of a noise and there's nothing going on upstairs, right? And so this is Joseph, right? He's got a weird dream, and I don't know what time it is. It might be 3:30 in the morning, 4 a.m., and he runs into his brother's bedroom, and they've got all the bunk beds, and some of them are snoring pretty hard. I mean, these guys, there's a lot of guys in that room, okay? So he runs in, flips on the light switch. "Hey, guys! Well, you might be a little startled. That freaks anybody out at 4 in the morning, okay? And he tells them, "Hey, listen, I've got a dream. And the dream was you guys were all bowing down to me." Was that more important than my sleep? Is what I'm thinking. I mean, let's just kind of put this into a modern day context. If my little brother Johnny, right over there, if he calls me at 4 a.m. tomorrow and he tells me, "Hey man, I'm a little bit taller than you now. I'm the boss. I can beat you in wrestling. I'm better than you." I mean, I don't know. Please don't do that, first of all. But I might not receive that too well, right? And there's really nothing to suggest that Joseph goes about it quietly. I mean, he's 17 years old after all. I mean, I can kind of picture him in the weeks following. He's the runt of the litter. He's the youngest. I mean, so they're wrestling, and of course, Joseph probably gets beat down into submission. And, as he's picking himself up, "Don't forget, I'll remember that when I'm ruler one day." Okay, he might have some of this jovial spirit, and it's gonna rub his brothers the wrong way. I don't know if they're gonna tolerate this so long, and in just a second, we're gonna see what they do to spite him. But this is really important for us to pause. Joseph had the same experience that you or I might have had before. Joseph had a dream for his life. He's got this big idea of what the future is going to look like. One day he's thinking, "I'm going to be in charge and I'm going to rule people. I don't know how, and I don't have the full picture, and I don't know when, but I just know it." Well, that's no different than you or I having dreams. They might look somewhat different. When I am 18, I'm going to go to college. Or when I'm in my 20s, I'd like to find myself in a relationship. I want to have this many kids and work at this job and have this house. And all of a sudden, you've got this picture of what life is going to look like up ahead. So we're Joseph now. And Joseph finds this so fascinating, so captivating, that he decides he's going to tell his parents about it. Let's see what they respond with. When Joseph told his father, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now, so he tells his brothers, they don't like it, obviously. He tells his parents, and they're a bit confused. Father looks back at him and says, "You mean to tell me that you're going to rule your mother and myself? I mean, Joseph, we simple folk over here. I mean, the only leading we do is some leading sheep in the pasture." I don't know what this guy was like, but that could have been the conversation, right? And so Joseph, he has this far-fetched dream. And as perhaps far-fetched as it might be, what does his dad do with it? He keeps the matter in mind. He tucks it away. He doesn't forget. And I can't help but see a heavenly correlation here. Can I tell you guys something? You know, Joseph's father would hold on to his dreams, but here's some good news for you. Your heavenly Father doesn't forget where you want to be. He doesn't forget if you have an idea or a dream or a heart passion or a soul craving. God doesn't one day wake up and think, oh, what was that idea that they had? I kind of forgot. No, he knows the plans that he has for you, right? He knows what's going on. He's not going to forget. So if you, from the time that you were 4 years old, you've wanted to be a mom, he doesn't forget about that. If you've wanted to be a teacher ever since you were in the first grade, no matter how much time has passed from when that dream was released, he won't forget. In fact, there's even better news. He even remembers the dreams that you and I forget about. Have you ever had that experience where you kind of circle back on something that was in your heart 15 years ago? You might have been 15 years old, and now you're 30 or 35, and you're like, wow, I just stepped into that. I remembered what God had planted in my heart so many years ago. Isn't that incredible? He doesn't forget where you want to be. And so Joseph, he's got this idea. He's got this dream. And it's become so toxic in the household that his brothers are stirred to malicious thoughts. They want to kill him. And so one day they're out in the field, and Joseph comes up on them. Here's what it says in Scripture. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Well, thank you, Reuben. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and they threw him into the cistern. And the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. I want you just to picture this here with me. You've got the brothers over here. They're huddled. Maybe one of them has a stick. He's drawing in the dirt. They've got their plan all laid out. And of course, perfect timing. Here comes Dreamer Boy. Hey guys, wait up for me. Okay, so here he comes. Oh, let's get rid of this guy. So here he comes. And this is where it starts to turn for Joseph. They wait until Joseph is standing right there in his presence. Innocent, helpless, can't do anything. And they grab him, they throw him to the ground, beat him, kick him, pick him back up, and throw him down into the cistern. Now, what would that have been back then? A cistern was basically a pit 30 to 50 feet deep that was dug into the ground. It was used to collect rainwater and bring nourishment to the surrounding land, perhaps to the family that owned it. But there's something that's so interesting that the Bible makes mention of. This isn't a normal cistern, is it? There's no water in this one. So it's not like he falls 5 feet. Here, I'm just going to start floating, right? He falls 30 to 50 feet down into the bottom of the pit. And there he lands. Boom. Bloody, broken, bruised. He's looking at the scrapes on his body, and he's got tears in his eyes. I bet he could barely stand up straight. This was not where he wanted to be. And from the bottom of the pit, he can overhear his brothers. They're laughing at him. They're making a sport of him. And from the tears in his eyes, he can barely overhear. There's another conversation happening. Turns out some slave traders had just walked by. Perfect timing, right? And they were settling on a price to sell him into slavery. And from the bottom of the pit, I can't help but put myself in Joseph's shoes. You can't do this to me. What are you thinking? Come on, I'm going to tell Dad. Guys, stop. This isn't a joke anymore, right? Joseph now feeling the gravity of the situation. This is not where he wanted to be. He was supposed to be a ruler. That was in his head. He wasn't supposed to be a slave. And so right now that dream was far from reality, because here he is in the bottom of a pit and it's separating him from where he wanted to be. I couldn't help but just make a connection here this morning. The pit is the place when you can't see a way to get from here to there. You can't see the way. Whatever situation you might find yourself in, here's Joseph. There's no way out. It's not like he can climb. He's stuck. The walls are smooth. They're too high. His vision is only limited to that small blip of sky right up above him. And now it seems impossible for him to be a ruler when he's just been sold as a slave. This is not where he wanted to be. He feels entirely alone. And yet he might not be that alone after all. You might find yourself in a pit, at the bottom of it, with no way out this morning. The situation you're facing, it feels like you're kind of stuck. So here's some examples I was thinking of. The pit is that place when you don't have enough scholarship money to attend your dream college. It's when you've been single for the last several years and there's still no suitable match in sight. It's when your marriage, it might seem beyond repair. It's when you've been working the same dead-end job for who knows how long, and you're no closer to your dream career than when you started. The pit is the place when you've always wanted to be a mother and you found out you can't have kids. The pit is the place when you're sick and the doctors don't seem to have an answer and you don't want to be here. You'd rather be up there. So where is the purpose? What is the reason behind all of this? That's how Joseph felt. Joseph felt stuck, trapped, and yet the chapters continue in his story. Let's see what happens when he's moved into a period of time where he's stuck as a slave. Joseph was taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. Oh, I love this. The Lord was with Joseph. He might have felt alone. He might have felt like this is overcoming me, but you know what? The good news is he wasn't alone. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. So the chapters have now moved on. And Joseph is moved over 300 miles by foot to the land of Egypt. And this new character comes into the story. What was his name? Do you remember? Potiphar. Potiphar is a military leader. He's got quite a big amount of power. He's very prominent in the affairs of Egypt. And so because of that, he would be gone for days at a time on business trips. And that'll actually come into play a little bit later. And so he needs help. And so he brings on Joseph to help in the household. And he starts at the bottom rung, I would imagine. Perhaps Joseph is scrubbing the floors, cleaning the toilets, and gradually over time, he works himself into a position where he's got a lot more entrusted. Maybe he's picking up Potiphar's kids from school. Maybe he's making sure that the menu is prepared for each day. Perhaps he's in charge of all the other slaves that are there in the household, and so this isn't so bad. This isn't the ruling that he dreamed of, but not so bad. But one day, you know the story, it all comes crashing down, doesn't it? He's not the only one that's noticed. This wife of Potiphar sees Joseph. She kind of likes him. likes what she sees. And so I don't know exactly what happens. Perhaps she began to wear some promiscuous clothing. She would whisper things in his ear. She invited him to sleep with her. This was quite a bad situation for Joseph. And every time he's put to the test, he does the right thing, right? He said, no, I can't do this. I don't want to dishonor the Lord. And so finally she puts herself out there to such a degree where he says no, and she's embarrassed. And the blood rises to her face, and she's a little angry now. And you know what happens. She devises a story. And she calls her husband home early from a business trip. Okay, this isn't going to end up good. And she says, you know what happened? He tried to touch me. He tried to molest me. And all of a sudden, Joseph is in a really, really bad spot. Here's what happens next. When the master heard the story, he said, this is how your slave treated me. He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him, put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, what happened? The Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. Do you see? It's happening all over again. And he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. This is quite a roller coaster for Joseph. Do you see it so far? Everything was going pretty good, wasn't it? Until it all came crashing down. And so now Joseph is slumped over, head against the cell. He's thinking, this was not supposed to happen. What could I have done differently? Come on, God. What are you doing? What is the purpose? What is the reason? So the same thing that happened in Potiphar's house happens in the prison. He works himself up to such a degree where he's given more responsibility. And this wasn't the ruler, though, he thought about. In fact, the dream seemed a little bit further away from when he first dreamed it. So what is God doing? No longer was it a pit. Now he's stuck in a prison, and it's keeping him from that place where he wanted to be. I couldn't help but find a connection here. The prison is that place when you don't know how long it will take before you get there. There's no timetable. You don't know how long it's going to take. You know, for Joseph, he's not going anywhere fast. There's no timetable. He can't break out anytime soon. And so now he's locked up, waiting for a dream that he's not even sure is going to happen now. But he's not the only one that feels locked into a situation. You might feel locked into your current situation and you can't see a way out and you don't know how long you're going to be there. What does that look like? Well, the prison is that place when you've been waiting for your dream job to become available and it's just not happening. It's that place when you're paying off your school debt and you just can't seem to make a dent. Maybe there's some of you who have just been battling anxiety and you're wondering, when will there be a breakthrough? You're perhaps in a marriage that seems to be falling apart and you're wondering, when is it going to get any better? Or how long am I going to be single? I don't want to be here. How long am I going to be sick? I'd rather be there. And you don't know how long it's going to take. And you're wondering right now, is it even going to happen at all? I'm sure Joseph kept circling back to a question. Why? What is the reason behind all this? What is happening to me? And you can just imagine for a second. His situation is only exacerbated when two other guys come into prison and he can see the fulfillment of their dreams. That's a pretty frustrating place to be, am I right? When you start to see somebody else progress and you're still stuck. It's when somebody else gets healed and you're still praying for the healing. It's when you're in a position where you're wondering, what is God's will for my life? Everyone else is figuring it out. I'm stuck. That's Joseph. And he doesn't know what he could have done any differently. And here he is. he's in a prison, and this is not where he pictured himself. And I don't know what I could have done any differently. Before we wrap it up, I just want you to think critically for a second. What would you tell Joseph? What would you tell Joseph if they brought you in to be his prison counselor? And you're supposed to hear out the stories of these prisoners. Don't worry, Joseph. It's just a season. God's got this. You know what Joseph might fire back at you? A season? Yeah. I've been stuck in this position for 13 years. This is longer than a season by now. And some of you might relate to some of that frustration that Joseph is feeling. Maybe you're walking through that this morning in your current position. Where is the purpose? What is the reason when I'm not where I want to be? Surely there's got to be something. And I want us to discover it. And in fact, the only way that we could find it is if we fast forward another many, many long years, many, many chapters. He spends all of his 20s in the prison. That was 13 long years. And as the story goes, you might know it, he is finally embraced by Pharaoh when he has a dream. And Joseph is able to interpret that dream. Pharaoh is very impressed by it and appoints him all of a sudden to be second in command over all the affairs of Egypt. And it's finally happening now. Now he's a ruler. It took a really long time. One night he was in the pit and in the prison. The next night he's sleeping in the palace. This is pretty cool. And he serves in this capacity, second in command, for 10 years, until one day he stumbles into his brothers, and he didn't expect to see them in the market. He runs into them, and what do you think he's thinking? With one word, I could kill them. Flick. Don't have to worry about these guys anymore. These are the guys who sent him on his journey in the pit and into the prison. They are the ones responsible. I can execute them. I've got good reason. Look what he says in the face of his adversity. Joseph says to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." I'll invite Pastor Shannon forward. Don't be afraid. You intended to harm me. God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done. Isn't that amazing? What incredible forgiveness. The very people that sent him into the pit and into the prison are the very same people he chooses to bless. How? The only reason that I could think of was that Joseph had some time to reflect. He had all those years to think about what had been done to him. Don't think he forgot about it. I'm sure he replayed that moment with his brothers every single day for the last 20 years. But now, he can see what God was doing with him in the process. He can see that God was taking a young, innocent 17-year-old and transforming him into the man that he was called to be. By now, he can see the reason behind all of this. He sees the purpose behind the pit and the prison. And I hope this brings some encouragement and hope to you this morning. Here it is. God isn't so much concerned about where you go or what you do as he is with who you become. He's way more concerned about that. You know, sometimes we wonder what life will look like. God is more concerned about who you're gonna look like. He wants you to be a mirror, a reflection of Christ with the image of God inside of us. He's more concerned about who you're becoming in the process. I think we've got to all understand something. Joseph wasn't ready to rule when he first had the dream. He had to land in the pit. He had to spend time in the prison before he was able to step foot into the palace. And now he's got some time. He's got this thing called perspective. He can look back and he can see, oh my, God never forgot about the dream. He never forgot about where I wanted to be. It was all about getting me there. And I had to go through different chapters to make sure that he refined me to such a degree where I could be a vessel. I could be the one through the Holy Spirit saving many lives for God's kingdom. There was a purpose. There was a reason behind all of it. Do you see it now? The pit was used to humble him. Potiphar's house was used to steward his gifts. The prison was meant to purify him. And all that had to happen before he could step foot in the palace. All of those chapters were intended to transform him to where he needed to be. And that might be you this morning. And you're wondering, am I at chapter 37 or chapter 50? There is a lot of chapters in between. Do you realize that? And you might be anywhere in between the story. We all have been there. And you might this morning find yourself in a situation that you don't want to be in. And it might involve your job. It might involve your health, your relationship status, your living situation, your education, your family, your future. I've got some good news. God can use the pit and the prisons of your life to cultivate the character necessary for you to carry out the dream. Did you know that? God can use it all. The pit, the prison, and the palace. It's all for your good and his glory. He can use your bad for his good and your good. Isn't that amazing? There is a purpose. There is hope. And we don't have to feel alone, because in every chapter, God makes sure to remind us, you are not alone. Did you catch that when we underlined it? The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with him in the pit, and he was with him in the prison. He was with him when he was at Potiphar's house. And the same is true of you. The Lord is with you, and that is amazing. And so this morning, I just want to leave you with a roadmap to walk through this well, because I know it's difficult, and I know not every situation looks the same. But there was another guy in the Psalms who found himself in a sticky situation. In fact, it's not where he wanted to be. He would rather be anywhere but where he found himself. And yet this is what he says in Psalms 40. I waited patiently for the Lord. Can somebody say that with me? I waited patiently for the Lord. That was us. Look what happens as a result. He turned to me and he heard my cry. Your prayers are heard. It's not going to an empty room. It's going to the throne. He hears you. He lifted me out of the slimy pit. Lifted me out of the mud, out of the mire. It was a little sticky. I didn't know how I was going to get out of this. I couldn't do it by myself for sure. And what? He set my feet on a rock. I love this. He gave me a firm place to stand. There was a new direction. There was new life. There was new hope. And what happens? He put a new song in my mouth. Man, if you've been singing the same praises, it might go to a whole nother level when you're with the Lord. He can do something through your pit and prison so that your worship is transformed. A new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. Blessed is the one who what? trusts in the Lord. Trust in Him. Trust in Him. Trust in Him. Would you stand to your feet this morning? Can I encourage you? Hold on. Hang in there. Wait patiently. The Lord will respond. He is doing something through your situation, even when you didn't picture yourself there. And you're wondering, what can God make of this mess? He can do a lot. That's the end. He can do a lot. And it's for your good and His glory. But trust in Him. Can I just encourage you? Trust the process. Trust that the one who writes our stories knows where to put periods and commas and dots and exclamation points. He knows it all. And He's writing it, and He knows exactly what chapter you're in this morning. So what I want to do, I want to encourage some of you who might be walking through some difficult times or difficult season right now. Very simply, we just respond to the word. The Lord has spoken. I'm just a mouth right now. And yet He's inviting you to come forward. And that's why we have people around here, prayer partners. We partner with you. We want to pray with you. We want to speak life into some situations. And for others, you might be standing here and you don't know how to walk through this, or in the past, you don't know how to go through these situations well. You say, I don't follow the Lord. I don't follow God. Can I just encourage you? You might find yourself in a bad spot this morning, but we've all been in a certain position that's far worse than the situations you might be facing in the physical realm. In the spiritual realm, we were far from God, and we actually wanted it. We would have preferred that. And yet God is beckoning each and every one of us to a relationship with Him, where He can restore and heal and forgive and break bondage. He can do that for you. He can do that for you. He provides it all. And if that's you this morning, I'm going to invite you to come forward as well. I want to pray for you. We have people who want to come alongside you. And so as we're about to prepare, I'm going to invite our prayer partners to come forward. I'm going to invite the worship team back. And for those who want to respond, just come forward. And if you want to protect that time and be alone with God, just feel free to kneel here at the altar. For the rest of you, you can feel free to stand. We want to come alongside, and that will be a sign that we're going to pray for you. Holy Spirit, we welcome you here. God, you know where we're at. You know where we're at in the story. And yet you're doing it all for our good. And yet some of us might be stuck in our perspective right now. We might not be able to see very clearly or see a big part of the picture. God, help us to wait on you. Help us to put our trust in you. Would you bring freedom? Would you bring discernment? Would you bring hope in some dark places? Break bondages, Lord. Bring forgiveness. Lord, it is only you. And we might find ourselves in all these different spots today. You see us. We glorify you. We stand in the gap for others. Hallelujah. Praise and glory and honor in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I'm going to invite those to come forward if you want to be prayed for. If you'd like to spend some time here.